All right. Perfect. See Anna just well. Share my screen for you.
Thanks, Jackie. Oh, I'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Oh, sorry, can we go back? Thank you. Hi, everyone again. My name is Ching Chan. I think I introduced myself at the last meeting. I am with the Seattle Department of Transportation. I work with Adonis here to provide some support to him and this group in terms of ensuring that the momentum continues with this work. We know is super important. So I'm going to be working with Belen here to go over some data that we have on hand. And we're going to try to go through this as quickly as possible and leave about 5 minutes for Q&A. So if it's okay, we ask that you hold the questions, your questions, if you have any until then. So this is our vision, mission, values, and goals here at SDOT is that SDOT is a thriving, equitable community powered by dependable transportation. We are on a mission to deliver a transportation system that provides safe and affordable access to places and opportunities. Our core values and goals include equity, safety, mobility, sustainability, livability, and excellence. Thanks. Next. Here's a quick outline of our presentation today. We want to go over some summary, some highlights of our data that we have. We have some data on vehicular volumes as well as collisions and locations of said collisions along Lake Washington Boulevard. We also have some bike data of bike volumes and a little bit of pedestrian data, but I think we'll get to it when we, I'll share a little bit more when we get there. There's clearly a little bit of a gap there. We also have some public comments that we've collected in the last couple of years that we can share. And then drawing from those public comments, some common themes of what folks feel or how folks feel about Lake Washington Boulevard and the use of it. And like I said, we have about 5 minutes saved for Q&A at the end. And what I want folks to keep in mind as we go into these data summary is to see what we have already collected and where do you see the gaps are. I think this will be very informing in terms of our next steps in our outreach. And in reaching out to community members, stakeholders, what kind of information are we lacking right now that we want to have and to collect? How would it be useful in informing a decision that will be made? Next, please. I'll hand this over to Belen.
All right, everybody. So it's already posted live on our Keep Healthy Streets. So some of this is available already online. And we pulled from a few SDOT collected data point resources. And so very similar project area, basically our scope mimics the Stay Healthy Streets extent is between Mount Baker Beach, which is at Lake Park Drive South, and Seward Park at South Juneau Street. Overall, we noticed that a lot of people rode bikes during the summer closures, and one of the highest numbers were shown on July 10th through the 11th weekend in 2020, where 3,911 people were observed riding their bikes. We found that the vehicle traffic on side streets were not higher during the weekend closures than during the weekday non-closures, except specifically we noted at Hunter Boulevard South and South 38th Street during the data collection of summer of 2021. And then the vehicle counts that were higher at Hunter Boulevard South and South 38th Street during the Keep Moving Street closures is roughly around 4,360 compared to a difference of roughly 200 vehicles, so 4,160. So you'll see about roughly almost a 5% increase. And again, this was collected during summer of 2021. All right, next slide. And so I know this looks like a very massive table, but very overwhelmingly, what I wanted to show you is the 7 years from January 2015 to April of 2022, we had a total of 101 car collisions. And this data is taken from the police reports. That's how we typically get a lot of our reported car collisions. And so you can see how they're breaking up by a few different collision types. So whether or not a car hit a pedestrian, cars on the different side swipes head on, whether or not they hit a bicycle, rear end, whether it was a serious injury collision, a regular injury collision, and if it involved property damage. So just wanted to show you this high level. And then for a visual, which is going to be on our next slide. Thank you. This is where I think this one also, the data speaks volumes. So again, this is the same project scope from Seward Park to Mount Baker, where you can see that very heavy red line in the upper left corner from the 3, the 12, and the 7. Most common collisions happen along the stretch between Mount Baker Beach and Stan Stayers Park, where there are no homes and very few destinations. Some other common locations where you see some red dots and darker red labeled numbers like the number 8 and the 5s and the 7. Those we notice are the common collisions where the boulevard curves following the lake shore. Those same locations have poor visibility and can be difficult for an impaired or distracted driver to negotiate without leaving the road, so i.e. a collision or a crash. So this is the visual, and then we're going to move on to the next slide. And then we wanted to show you some more vehicle volume data that was collected in 2020. So that would be during the pilot period, so June 28th, 2020. The gray line on the graphs show you before the pilot of May 17th. And that's before we started implementing the Keep Healthy Streets, or Keep Moving Streets, sorry. So you can see that the trends are showing that there is some reduction in motor vehicle traffic. And then you also see that the highest vehicle volume before and during the pilot is really late in the afternoon and into the early evening. So that's showing that folks are respecting the guard, like no drive-through vehicle traffic signs. And next slide. And I think this is where I pass it over to Jean.
Thanks, Belen. This slide, we have some volume data that we have collected from between 2020 and 2021. The different colors just shows you different time of collection of the data. Starting from the very left side of the graph, we have, or the chart, we have the darker blue, and that was collected in May 2020. I think overall, the overall trend here is that even though there is a slight reduction of bike usage along Lake Washington Boulevard in April 2021, the general trend is that there is an increase in use or increase in bicyclists using Lake Washington Boulevard since we have implemented the pilot of Stay Healthy Street and then Keep Moving Street. And the latest, the most recent data was collected in July of last year, 2021, where it really did spike up to nearly 4,000 bicyclists. Next slide, please. This is also more bike volume data information. We have before the pilot, I think this was May 15 to 19, 2020, we have roughly, we are using that as our baseline, which is roughly 2,800 for Friday through Tuesday, Friday evening to Tuesday evening, and then 2,000 from Friday afternoon or evening to Monday morning, and then Saturday morning to Sunday evening, and then Sunday just throughout the day for bicycle Sunday. And then we have during the pilot, the Stay Healthy Street pilot, we have a significant jump in all of the various timing. And so again, once again, supporting that there is more bicyclists using Stay Healthy Street or using Lake Washington Boulevard since we have implemented the pilot. Next. And this one, this data is just showing on the left here, there's gray and maroon. The gray is before the pilot, and then the maroon is during the pilot. And on the left side is the bicycles or bicyclists, and then on the right side is motor vehicles. This really just goes to show that during the pilot that we saw a lot more bicyclists using Lake Washington Boulevard compared to cars, which was reduced significantly, and that most drivers were very respectful of our street closure signs, but then local access were maintained. Next. For pedestrian data, I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier. We really do need to get more data collection on this. We currently do not have data on the number of people walking along Lake Washington Boulevard. We actually have a counter on Lake Washington Boulevard and South 45th Street near Genesee Park, in which the latest collection of data was on Sunday, May 17th. I want to say it was 2020 before the pilot, and also on Sunday, June 28th, which was right after the pilot was started. We saw that the volumes of people crossing the street on foot were actually lower during the pilot than before. We weren't quite we weren't really able to identify the reason for that, but we're just assuming that it's probably a change in pattern of how people are using Lake Washington Boulevard by foot. Next. I know we just had a lot of numbers to share, but we also understand that qualitative information is just as important as numbers. And so we did receive well over 600 emails from folks when we had our Stay Healthy Street inbox in 2021 to get some feedback on how folks felt about Lake Washington Boulevard pilot closure. And we had, out of the 600 plus emails, we have about 65% of the folks were supportive. About 27% of the folks were opposed, and about 8% of them had either a mixed opinion or an alternative suggestion for how Lake Washington Boulevard should be used. Next. And because we have received so much feedback from community members and stakeholders and other users, we kind of drew themes from those who were in favor and those who were opposed to the program. And from those who were in favor, they mostly agreed that the Stay Healthy Street or Keep Moving Streets provides space for social distancing, and that aggressive drivers make it hard to enjoy biking along Lake Washington Boulevard, and that removing traffic noise improves experience along Lake Washington Boulevard. And also that Lake Washington Boulevard is a very useful utilitarian north-south bike route. And for those who are opposed to the program, found it to be difficult to travel by car, especially to UW, University of Washington, Madrona, or Leshai. It makes access to lakefront parks harder, more barriers to access these parks. And that closing Lake Washington Boulevard diverts traffic onto neighborhood streets. Last but not least, it makes, it will ban, I think one of the major concerns was that it would ban recreational driving on Lake Washington Boulevard. Thanks. And with that, we will now open it up for questions. I know we already have a couple of them in the chat, so I'll go over. I think the first one we have is from Parisia. Okay, the data that you sent to us, Jackie, are you able to speak to whether or not the data that Parisia shared was included on our Google Docs?
The Patricia, I feel like that would be a Belen or Adonis question.
Okay.
So it was not in the same format of the presentation that we just shared at this time. But if you read one of the earlier Word docs, I believe, not the fact sheet, but there was another handout and that has similar information, but we will definitely send out this PowerPoint after.
Thank you. And then I think Jennifer had a question about on the overall data summary page, that vehicle traffic doesn't increase on side streets during the times Lake Washington Boulevard is closed to traffic. Can we go back to that page real quick, Jackie?
Yes, let me just get my screen shared. And which slide was that again?
I think that was on 3 or 4, maybe 4. Sorry about that.
No problem.
And I answered the question in the chat chain where I responded, yes, only one location shows increased vehicle traffic, which is on Hunter Boulevard South and South 38th Street.
Got it. Does that answer your question, Jennifer? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Belen. And then we have, let's see, Clara, is it possible to have a shared doc storage space with all of these handouts and slide decks for the worker? Yes. I believe we're working on a central location to hold and store all this information in the slide deck, so that especially for folks who aren't able to join us in these meetings, we'll be able to catch up. Thank you. Jennifer, you have a quick question?
Yeah, not to belabor the point, I think I'm maybe just not understanding. It just seems amazing to me that when you close like Washington Boulevard, the neighboring streets don't get more traffic. Do you think, I mean, I don't know if you know, do they go over to Rainier Avenue? How do you think that much traffic is being kind of handled? I guess would be the word.
That's a very good question. We did put in a request to our traffic operation division within SDOT to get information on data on adjacent streets. And so we're trying to get a better understanding of, yeah, like you said, where are those cars going? Where are they diverted to? Where are they detoured to? Knowing that the local access has remained. So folks who live along the area is still able to access their homes and I don't know, businesses or areas of interest. And so once we get that information back, we'll be able to share that information with you all. So we also need to get the data of those side streets or adjacent streets before, like pre-pandemic, to better understand how that compare, whether the number has gone up significantly over time. Thank you. Joey, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah, let's see. Thank you so much for pulling all this data together. Going to the side streets, can you identify which streets you identify as the side streets to be surveyed?
Sorry, I'm just gonna pull the map real quick. Sorry.
No problem.
So we didn't put in a request to survey adjacent streets. I think we were just looking into Wilson Ave as a potential detour. We looked into, I know it's way farther out, but Rainier Ave as a potential detour. And then Seward Park.
What was the last one?
Seward Park Ave.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
And so I just had my hand up because I wanted to respond to Patricia's comments. We do have the docs that you shared, Patricia, and I believe they've been forwarded to the team.
Yeah, I did that.
Okay, yeah. So, but they were not part of this presentation that we just gave right now because it's only the SDOT data that we
Yes,
collected.
I'm asking if they've actually been collected. I understand you're putting together documents into a Google Doc. I just wonder if they've just dropped off the radar or if they will be actually collected, gathered, saved.
Yeah, that's actually the part that we'll be doing next, after this, is going through that.
And I can tell you that I live on Orca Street and it's really, and I live in the neighborhood. I just think it doesn't seem logical or consistent with the neighborhood's experience that there wasn't an increase in traffic. I don't understand how that is, well, possible. So I'm wondering if, I guess you already answered the question of where you looked. But overwhelmingly, that is not the residents' experience.
Thank you for that, Patricia. And I apologize. I think I read your name wrong earlier. I think that's something that we will look into. And I think that's why we say that we look at both numbers as well, qualitative as well as quantitative information, because we know that it's also very important how people's perception of how things are working or not working, and safety is also very, very important. We can't just base everything off of numbers, but we will try to look into whether traffic has been diverted into one of the streets that I've mentioned earlier to Joey, and see where we can try to draw some conclusions as to where those cars may have taken.
Great. I think that it just doesn't make sense to me. People aren't going to just stay home and they're going to still commute to work.
I understand.
Business, yeah.
Mhm. Thank you. I think, was it Joey first and then Anna? I don't know if they go in order, but.
I'd like to let Anna go ahead, seeing I've already asked a question.
Thanks,
Please
Joey.
come back to me. I appreciate it.
Will do. Thanks, Joey. Anna, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess two things. First, around the comment around traffic on Orca Street. So I live near Orca Street, but more Rainier Valley, and sort of to get to Lake Washington, that's where I usually bike or walk. And I feel like my perception when the Lake Washington Boulevard is close to cars, there's a lot of folks that want to come and access that space. And so I do see a lot of cars coming and parking on Orca Street to be able to get, to be able to bike, and because the parking lots at, in Seward Park were closed for a long time and then they get filled up. And so I don't know, I think that's really different than cut through traffic. But I do notice a lot more just people, wanting to come use this amenity when it is, when you can bring your kids and when it is really more open to people. So just commenting on that. But the other piece is sort of my bigger question comment was, I really do think, I mean, when we survey people who can't drive, you know, there is someone's decision to go somewhere is really based on how difficult that is. And, you know, just like we know induced demand is a thing, like it's the easier and faster it is to get somewhere, the more places people want to go. And so I know that these things are difficult to measure, but I do imagine that some car trips are going away when Lake Washington Boulevard is closed, in the same way that bike trips are created, right? When it becomes more comfortable and easier. And what I'm really interested in, I don't think we can do this with data or the way we're able to survey people right now, but understanding what trips we're not seeing from people who aren't able to drive on Lake Washington Boulevard, for example. You know, people who would like to be able to get down there on the bus and, you know, walk or roll on the lake, but right now just can't. And we're not, I worry in all this data that we're only seeing a very small picture of the people that are able to access it on the, you know, currently on the weekends when it's open, and then the transit's still not great. And that I really hope in the data collection, we're thinking intentionally about asking how people would like to use the space if they could get there and if it was accessible, versus sort of what is the current the current inaccessibility of so much of it, even when it's even when it is you know, has limited car traffic on weekends.
Thank you, Anna. And that's I think that actually segues right into our next part, but let's go ahead and hear from Joey first.
Thank you. And I think Anna touched on some of the points I was wanting to raise, which is, you know, is there any way to find out, you know, how these trips, both automobiles, bicycles, and walking, what was their purpose? Are people commuting to work? Are people just out there recreation? Are people out there parking along Lake Washington Boulevard to go fishing? And I imagine that you use sensors. Are there any ways to tell the hours? I think one of the graphs did point out hours of usage. Is there a way we can kind of see some of that stuff, or you can extrapolate, like, you know, more into what do weekday and weekend periods look like during different times of the day? And if you can kind of figure, well, this might be commuter rush hour and things like that. Knowing those things, I think, helps us see just how vital it is for people, whether they're on bicycles and automobiles and delivery trucks, how they use this space. And because that may be part of the solution. You know, if we recognize that it's a commuter issue, then and there's a recreation issue, and of course those are different during different times of day and different days of the year. And I think that I'm not sure if Parks and Rec or SDOT were behind the closures then, but I think they did do things like put those closures up like Labor Day and Memorial Day, when the thinking is there's probably going to be more people doing recreation than commuting. So I'll give it back to you.
Thanks, Joey. It's a good point.
All right. Any other questions? It feels like we're kind of moving on to what the next part of the agenda will be, but just want to make sure before we move to looking at the responses from the outreach document, if folks had anything else.
Yeah, I had a question in there about how the accident statistics compare with other major thoroughfares.
Let me get that back up. Okay. All right. So this was the data that was presented.
Right, but that's all for Lake Washington Boulevard. I'm wondering how the number, the danger, I guess the safety question is, how do those statistics compare with the other thoroughfares that people use and will have to use if it's closed? I don't know. I'm not saying that I expect that you would have that right now, but I think that would be, because, you know, I mean, it of course sounds alarming to hear that there are lots of accidents.
That's a very good question. I will go back to our team that we're already requesting some data information on the other side streets, if they have that information. And I'm pretty sure we do. I think it just takes a little bit of time to get that
Sorry,
information.
I didn't mean the side streets. That's a question of congestion. I mean the number of accidents. Well, I guess it would be side streets, but for example, most people are going to use Rainier Boulevard when it's closed.
Right.
Just as a, so yeah, I guess the side streets would be important too. I'm just thinking people tend to go faster on thoroughfares.
Right. Sorry, I meant when I say side street, I also meant the adjacent thoroughfares. So like Wilson Ave South, Rainier Ave South.
Yeah, like
those bigger streets, arterials that cars
Yeah,
are more likely to divert to.
Okay.
Yeah, we will definitely look into collision rates along those corridors as well.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, I saw Joey and then Anna.
Don't worry about me. I'm good. You can go on, Anna.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Thank you. We're playing tag teams here. No, I just had a response to Patricia's questions about crash rates because I think when I was on the Seattle Pedestrian Advisory Board a while back, or it was, before the pandemic, but we were looking at crash rates comparative for bikes and peds in different corridors. And it was actually sort of really surprising to me how low the crash rates were on like Washington Boulevard. And I think a lot of that has to do that most, a majority of crashes do tend to happen at intersections. And the kind of nice thing about biking or walking along Lake Washington Boulevard is you don't have all those intersections, right? Because it's on a lake. And so even though it does feel very uncomfortable, I think, to bike along it, because cars do have to, pull around you and into the other lane of oncoming cars, there's actually less bike crashes there than other places in the city where you have a lot of conflicts with intersections. So just recognizing, I think that while it might not be the most comfortable place for a lot of us to walk or bike in the street itself, it actually is maybe safer than being on Rainier or MLK, which are sort of the comparable direct flattish routes.
Thanks for naming that, Anna.
Perfect. So it sounds like there were some really great points brought up that we've definitely been taking notes on, and hopefully the data folks will be able to get that information to us as soon as possible. So thank you all for identifying some of those extra points of data that will be helpful for people to understand and have a picture of what's all happening here on Lake Washington Boulevard. Perfect.
Could I just mention that and I'm sorry, I haven't sent it out, but the census, of course that's 2020 census, provides some a lot of information about, well, not only the population in these affected basically zip codes, but the percentage of people that commute to work by car, public transportation, and bikes. I think it was about 2% for 98118 are commuting to work by bicycle, and it says 0% for 98178 just south of us. But obviously somebody must be. It was just that it didn't reach a number high enough to make a percent, I guess. So I can send that along too. I don't have farther up, because this was a neighbor who had collected this data, but I can look for it.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Okay, so let's see. We had hoped to be able to do breakout groups, but I'm feeling like it would actually make more sense to just keep everyone together. And we actually have a little bit more time than we had thought since we went through the data and questions pretty quickly. So I'm going to just kind of put up on the screen. So this was the document that you all were sent out regarding different questions around your goals for this process, objectives and outcomes that people are hoping to have after this, how we want to meet those above objection or objectives, the best way to make this happen. What are some of the questions we want to be able to ask community members, and then when we want to start the outreach and host a public event. And so we know not everybody was able to fill out this document, which is okay, because again, since we're such a small group today, we're actually going to just do this together during the meeting. And when we were going through people's responses, we noticed that there were 3 main areas of what we're feeling like the umbrella pieces of information that are most important to you all. And so that first one would be park experience and improvements. So I'll just put that in the chat. And this is not in a ranked order of importance. Oops, sorry. This is all right, apologies y'all. Okay, let's say park experience and improvements. So that is the first one that we notice is kind of an umbrella subject area for everyone. The next one that came out is bike, pedestrian, and people safety. Okay. And then lastly, the last umbrella area that we're looking at is access and circulation network. So this is what we felt like, you know, kind of defined the overarching themes and areas of consideration around Lake Washington Boulevard. And so what we did was just break up by each question and entered in all of your responses. And what the hope that we're going to be able to do today is to be able to really narrow down, particularly the questions section, what questions that we're trying to ask. We had lots of questions submitted by everybody, and conversations that we've had as SDOT staff and consultants is that we've all been there before when someone comes up to you with a survey. And even if it's something that you're really interested in, you know, you do your best to engage, but you know, they probably have caught you in the midst of doing something. I'm sure we've all been there. And so thinking about what people's attention span really is and like how much time people have to give to a survey, we kind of feel like that number that is going to hopefully be able to keep people engaged is about 10 to 12 questions. Does that sound reasonable to everyone? You all have been there where someone's asking you to fill out a survey. Okay, Clara says even that feels like a lot. Okay, so you all see the objective here is that we have these 3 bucket areas of like what, you know, the major concerns are and what probably people are most interested and care about when it comes to changes to the boulevard. And when we get to the responses around the questions, we got to be very strategic on how we narrow that number down to what feels like the most reasonable and important, and keeping in mind that this is phase 01 of this project. And so if there's questions that we're not able to get to in our outreach process, that's also valuable information that would go into the report at the end of our time together, that, you know, with more time, more resources, more outreach, these are additional questions and considerations that, you know, the task force feels would be important for this work around Lake Washington Boulevard. And so with that, we wanted to do this as a group to really recommend what we're hoping for is the top 3 questions that would be used throughout the various outreach tactics that we're going to do per each of these buckets. And so as you'll see, as we go through this process, that might be a little bit harder for certain bucket areas to narrow down to only 3, but we're gonna do our best to put that together and recommend. And so let's start with park experience and improvements. And I'm also going to drop a link to this document in the chat in case you want to follow along on your own computer as well. So apologies for all of the screen sharing that's happening today. And Joey, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, so I have a question, and this is not really so much about the actual data or actual questions, but about the methodology of collection. Will we be collecting demographics such as, you know, a residency, abilities, and so many other things? Will we be collecting those, or are we just asking the question?
That's a very good question. I can probably speak to that if that's okay, Jackie. We typically at SDOT, we do include a set of those demographic questions because it does help us better understand folks that we are serving, the communities that we're serving, and who we're able to reach and who we still need to reach. However, we typically make those optional questions. I think in the spirit of ensuring that folks' attention span will not we won't go over that attention span. We can include 10 questions that this group develops, and then make those demographic questions, include those demographic questions as optional, as we have been doing. I think it's a little easier when it's online because folks are sitting down probably in front of their computer and has a little bit more time to fill that out. But we found that that may not always be the case for intercept surveys or when people are filling out surveys in on their way to and from work or to home. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, but you'll see later I'm going in a whole other weird direction, but go ahead, Jennifer.
Not weird.
Oh, Jennifer, you're on mute. Sorry.
Sorry. I was wondering what sort of answers are we looking for? Short answer or yes, no, or a checkbox? Because, you know, some of the questions I added, it kind of depends on what we realistically think people will answer, that if the question is a good one for this kind of survey. Does that make sense? Like, I might just cross some of the map that I submitted because I'm not sure they're going to be answerable in the format that will be presented them.
I can attempt to answer. I first and foremost, I think it's up to this group what kind of answer you all are looking for. What's helpful, do you think, in extracting information from folks? To me, I always am a big fan of multi-prong approaches. So it's always a yes and no, and then explain. So give folks, I think the meat of the or the essence of asking these questions is not just knowing yes or no. It's understanding the reasoning behind the yes or no's. And so I always like to provide that opportunity for folks to share on a deeper level what is causing you to say yes, what's causing you to say no. And I think that's a lot more telling. But I think going back to like ensuring that folks will have time to want to share, we can always start with a yes or no, and then please explain why. Bella and then Jackie, please feel free to chime in.
That sounds about right to me. Okay. Wonderful. All right, let me put on the screen. And so this one, while I feel like we have heard a lot from folks around park experience. I feel like this one might have been a little bit harder for folks to think about what, survey questions look like this for this, because when we were going through people's responses, there were not too many answers that felt like it would go under park experience and improvements. But definitely when it came to goals and objectives for this process, people had we could tell, of course, that this is important to you all. So thinking about goals for this process, folks said that, maintain or improve the park experience and reduce real or perceived barriers to the park, make better transportation connections to other nearby parks, maintain integrity of Olmsted design intent, both as a boulevard and as part of the boulevard system, improvements to landscape that will reinforce the park character of the boulevard, and traffic calming to increase safety and improve park experience. And so again, hearing for in the objectives and outcomes that we heard for in the goal process, that the city will, remove any real or perceived barriers to accessing parks along Lake Washington Boulevard. When it came to asking questions, or the type of questions we would want to ask in regards to understanding people's perceptions or experience or needs and wants around improving the park experience and improving it, we didn't really have any questions that fit under that in folks' response. And so would love to kind of open it up to folks on thoughts and reactions to the goals and outcomes, and if there are potential questions that are coming up for folks. Because if we don't really have too much around parks, the park experience and improvements to the park, then I guess the bulk of the questions would go to bike, pedestrian safety, and then the other one is circulation and network. And then Patricia said, how many responses to the outreach form have been received? So we only received 4 responses from task force members. And, I know that these meetings have been coming quick and we are somewhat on a timeline. And so, we're going to do our best to keep providing opportunities, but we really want to maximize our time together and be able to continue to move this process as best as we can, and doing it in a way, in an agreement amongst us that feels like, yes, we have consensus around the process. So yes, we received 4, and there will still be time for people to submit. Okay, so I believe the first hand that I saw was Joey and then Jennifer.
My hand is getting tired. Let's see. So I would say my question with this one is, I think it starts with a supposition that people understand, one, that these are parks, which I don't know that is understood. And 2, part of that, if you want to dig deeper, is who's Olmsted. I've actually told 10 people that this was the Olmsted thing this weekend because we've had several visitors and everything. And then I've had to go back and say, yeah, this is related to the guy who created the Central Park system. And so I don't know that it's understood there. I would say if we're going to keep that there, you might say the waterfront as opposed to parks, because that's what people will see there, their access to Lake Washington Boulevard along the water. So yeah, because I don't know that anyone's going to say, oh yeah, I was in that park right there between, Mount Baker Beach and Mount Baker Rowing Center. They're probably going to just say that's the waterfront. But that may be, I'm certainly open to other things, but that's maybe my perception.
That is a great point, Joey, because I feel like I might be in the group of folks that certain parts of it, I would be like, okay, this is a park, but other parts, for myself, I just like, or wherever you can pull over along Lake Washington Boulevard and like lay down a picnic blanket, like, yeah, that's the waterfront. That makes sense. Okay, so I'm gonna put down as notes that, just being mindful of language. Okay. All right, great point. Oops. All right. Yeah, so yeah, seeing, here's some of the goals and objectives that task force members are hoping in reference to the park and park improvements would come out of this. And so what if there are specific questions that come to mind for you all around how we can collect data to be able to provide information to the city to potentially address these goals and objectives in the future? Okay, so I see Jennifer, your hand is up, and then Patricia.
So I have a couple of questions that are just, we're brainstorming here, right? So I'll just throw them out there because some of them feel like leading questions, and I know that's not a great thing, so they'll need to be kind of polished up. But the first one is, when the boulevard is closed, however you say that, like when the boulevard's being used as a healthy street or however, you feel like it is less welcoming as a public space. I know that is counterintuitive, but that is something that the friends are concerned about. And the second question is, the goal of parks is that they provide access to restorative space and to the landscapes, the waterfront and the lake and all of those experiences in Seattle. And so the question I would have would be, does the boulevard provide those opportunities to you? Do you feel like it's, like, my question would be, does it provide a restorative space for you, which it should, it's a park space, and does it provide access to those almost I would call it the genius of place, which it's the views across the lake, the views to Mount Rainier, the lakeshore, all of those elements that you can really only get in that place. And so I think the question would be, does the boulevard provide access for you to those restorative special landscapes in Seattle? That is just a horribly funky question, but I think you know what I mean.
I'm sorry, can you say that last one again?
Sir, does the boulevard provide access to restorative spaces and landscape features? I don't know. Those could be sort of a placeholder. If it
Yeah,
makes the
and
cut,
no
we
need
can
to feel.
wordsmith.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, don't feel like you have to have the perfect worded question, because yeah, we'll use this time to brainstorm. And then also, I know we have a few folks on the team who can help clean and wordsmithing. So does the boulevard.
And I think Joey's point is really good, that particularly from my perspective, I think of these in really specific terms, but that doesn't mean that means anything to the people using the park. And how they would label what they're getting out of the experience.
Perfect. All right, Patricia.
Yeah, I just wanted to, so on the 3 umbrellas, the first one of them anyway it says bike, pedestrian, people safety. So does people safety include people in motorized vehicles? I mean, people and pedestrian sound the same to me, and I don't see, well, there's motorized vehicles and then there's rolling not vehicles, but people who roll.
SDOT staff and Chenlin, correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe that was just a little bit of a repetitive way. But I think we were thinking about just essentially bike and pedestrians.
Is there any reason not to include people in cars and people in wheelchairs, for example?
I don't think it excludes people in wheelchairs, but I will kick it to SDOT staff around if we were thinking it includes cars or if that's the other subject area.
Well, it's hard for me to understand why it would be excluded if we're concerned about also car accidents.
Sorry, the question is whether or not cars included in which category is that?
So the second category of bike, pedestrian, and people safety, Patricia is wondering if that includes cars.
And people who are rolling.
It definitely includes people who are rolling.
Anyway,
but in regard,
I guess I'm challenging that it doesn't include people in cars. That I think that it should, I guess is what I'm saying.
That's a good
I think it should include users of Lake Washington, community folks who use Lake Washington Boulevard, and they're not all in bikes or pedestrians. In fact, the vast majority of them are not biking or pedestrians.
all right, I'm seeing in the chat that Chelin said, I'm thinking that it's inclusive for safety of all modes.
Great.
Okay.
Well, it doesn't look that way now, but that's just a question of wordsmithing, I guess.
All right. Let's see, Joey, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, and so mine is a question of kind of process and methodology. And Ching, you might be the person that this is more directed to. I'm certainly not a pollster, but we are going to be doing multiple questionnaires or surveys, correct? So should our process be less minutia and more broad? Thank you. More broad at the beginning. So one, finding out what people's priorities are, maybe. Two, how those things play out on this road. And three, possible ideas for solutions. Because it seems like we're working in some very detailed stuff right now. And I'm wondering if that's going to be the best way to come up with solutions.
That's a that's a very good question. I feel like I've been saying that a lot. You guys have really good questions. I think what I agree, but I also just want to be mindful of the time that we have available between now and when we need to submit to a report to council. Now, I think as Jackie had mentioned earlier, if we feel like there's additional work that needs to be done and we don't have time for, I think it's okay, and we just name that and in hopes that council will be able to find money to make that happen. But I think I also want to be realistic with folks' time and capacity in carrying out the outreach. We currently haven't decided yet as a group in what form this outreach is going to look like. I think there's some ideas of a potential survey that has come up multiple times. So I think that's a pretty loud one, loud and clear. It may also be in a form of, and it can be a combination of things, right? It's not just one or the other, right? We can do, we can do some briefings, we can do in-person or online open house. We've done those before. And we can also, I don't know, we want to do some intercept surveys, pick a weekend or a weekday to set up a table at various parts of Lake Washington Boulevard to just stop folks and just have a chat. I think there are many different ways to do this. I think it depends on how this group feels would be the best use of everyone's time and what we think will yield the best results and reach the most number of people. sorry, I feel like I didn't actually answer your question. I just put that question back onto you.
Okay. No, no, yeah, because like I said, I certainly don't know what that is. And, look, I signed on to this because, I want to see some positive things come out of this discussion about how Lake Washington Boulevard is used. They're giving me $1,000 to be here, so I'm not going to gripe about, where my time goes. If I have the time available, I'm going to be present. I recognize there is some deadlines to this whole thing, and I know the time from the folks in SDOT and everybody else who's, this is their job, that means something too. But I don't want to do a survey that doesn't accurately get at the details, because we started with 10 questions that were very detailed and didn't really get the gist of what people are really looking for. So that's my point, I guess.
And if you feel, if folks agree or have additional thoughts, we can actually make the questions less specific and broaden it up. Is that the right way of portraying what you were getting at, Joey?
Yeah, so something, for instance, okay, the reason why I asked if we were doing demographics, because I was at a place and they were doing a survey and I really wanted to do the survey. You know why? Because they were giving you beans and they were letting you put beans in these jars, and these jars meant different things, different priorities. And if I wanted to put all my beans in a jar that said more, more after school programs, that's the thing I felt strongly about. I wanted to do that. So if our bean jar is out there, is it public access to parks? Is it, motor vehicle transportation? Is it more access to wheels? Is it more commuter bicycle routes? People can decide that. Once we decide what people's priorities are, we go, okay, we heard you that these things rose up to the top. What types of things do you think you'd like to see in there? And then we offer up some different things. But I don't know, maybe I'm kind of out there, but I don't want to give people this thing like, do you think we should close Lake Washington Boulevard, the northbound lane for traffic to go for bicycles between Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday? And really, that's at the end of other things that we find. So.
No, that's a very good point. And I think we can certainly look into including like maybe having at least 2 to 3 of those kind of broader questions in the survey, and having those questions go first, to kind of get people to start thinking about how they currently use or how they want to use Lake Washington Boulevard. And then we can, if we feel like we still want to keep some of the more specific questions that have a little bit more details in it, we can keep those, but that way we have a more balanced survey. And I think as something else as I just mentioned earlier is, in addition to wanting to confirm the number of questions and the questions themselves, I think we also want to check in with you all, the task force members, on what are those methods that we want to, what are some of the outreach activities that we want to embark on in carrying out this outreach work. We want to get some consensus on those as well. Start identifying those so that we know what is realistic with the time that we have. We have a list of, you all provided a pretty long list of stakeholders, stakeholder groups for us to reach out to in a part of this process. We also want to know, what are your expectations? Is the expectation that we will be reaching out to each and every single one of those stakeholder groups? And if so, is there any way that we can work with you all? Because some of you may have direct connections with some of those stakeholder groups. If you all can help us either make an introduction or help us be part of that conversation, that outreach work, I think there's definitely ways to go about that. But that's also things that we want to check in with you all on, the stakeholder list, and also the different methods and tactics of outreach.
Thank you.
Perfect. And then also, Patricia put a really great point in the chat that She said, I think we need someone with professional expertise to take our questions and ask them in the most effective way. And so definitely, I would say that when we're brainstorming right now, that we can clean these up and figure out, like, are these questions that we can turn into qualitative answers, or is there a way to like make it into like a checkbox answer? So I think if we can think about this process right now of like, you know, what's your general idea, or like, you know, where is the direction that we're trying to go with when in regards to questions, that can allow us to just go in on the back end and like clean that up and put it together. And then Clara, in regards to the stakeholder list, that is in a notes document. And we will get all of this information out to you all in like a Google Drive form so that you all have access to like the previous notes and recordings in one place. Okay. Let's see. Okay, Jennifer, I see you put into the chat that it seems like we could get at those priorities if we focus our questions on how people want to use the boulevard and don't ask too much about potential solutions. So that's
I
great.
was referring to Joey's kind of buckets of beans, which I think is a great idea, but we want to get at what people want with that before we jump to possible solutions.
Yeah, I like that. Wonderful. I'm just gonna put that under the notes right quick. Okay. Great. All right. Let's see. Let's say Clara and then Patricia. And Clara,
I also really like the idea of kind of getting a view of what people are interested in first, but I think that it's only really valuable if we are also making sure that we're following up with potential solutions. I feel like Seattle does a lot of asking people what their priorities are, particularly in the South End, without actually doing anything about it. And I think that we'd likely get more people interested in taking our survey and more interested in giving us more in-depth, thoughtful responses if we are able to clearly articulate what it is we're doing with their responses and how it's going to be incorporated into a solution eventually. So if we're going to be doing something a little bit more open-ended about people's priorities, we need to be really, really clear that we're following it up at this time with a survey about our recommended solutions or whatever comes next.
all right. Okay. Okay.
And sorry, if I can just, maybe just 1 minute. I think that makes a lot of sense, Clara, and Joey. I think the reason why I kept reiterating the question about timing is because, as you may know, carrying out a survey takes quite a bit of time. I think even just to get, the survey questions translated into different languages that are used in the areas. I think, and then we have to open it up for at least 3 weeks, right? To give folks to have a chance to fill it out, and then maybe set up shop along the corridor to do some intercept surveys, and then it will be even more time to go over the results of the information collected and to draw themes and analytics of what we have received or what we've heard from folks. So I just want to be mindful of whether or not we would have time for a second round of surveys. And if not, is there any way that we can feed two birds with one hand Are there opportunities to incorporate both the more open-ended questions with more specific questions as a follow-up question within the same survey, or is there a different way that we can reach as many people as a follow-up that does not require an additional month and a half of outreach activities? I just wanted to put that out there as an option.
Okay, so I feel like this is a pretty strong brainstorm when it comes to the direction you all are hoping to head in regards to questions around park access and improvement. Are there any other ideas around what type of questions we would want, or questions or direction of questions we would want to ask when it comes to improvement to parks and park access? Okay, so notes for Chen Lin, who's really gonna support with taking the lead on drafting these questions, is, you know, making sure that we have something that touches on accessibility to the waterfront, and then people's just overall perceptions around what they feel like the waterfront does for them when they visit. Okay. Okay, thank you, Jennifer. I'll put that in place. Okay. All right, so let's move over to the one I feel like that's gonna take the longest, and that's the bike, pedestrian and people safety. So this one, folks had a lot to say about what their goals for this process was. When we were going through those answers, a lot came up around bike, pedestrian, and people safety. So creating access for disabled non-drivers and others who can only rely on transit, walking, rolling, or biking. Increase safety for people biking, walking, and rolling while maintaining access for all users while substantially reducing motor vehicle traffic. Reduce motor vehicle traffic volumes and speeds. Discourage motor vehicles commuting by outside of neighborhood drivers. Significantly increase the number of. Yes.
Oh,
Did somebody say something?
sorry. No, no, I'm sorry. I thought I'll mute myself. Sorry. No, I was surprised by that because I think people get to work that way. That seems to exclude a whole group, giant group of people.
All right. Okay, so significantly increase the number of days, weekends, throughout the year for 3-mile closures, including providing the necessary infrastructure to effectively close the roadway to motor vehicles. Current barricades are not adequate in allowing for emergency vehicle access. Increase safety for people biking and create a safe north-south bike route through the Rainier Valley that is reasonably flat, accessible, and easy to follow. Increase space and usability for people walking and rolling. The current path is not accessible. Reduce car traffic to less than 1,000 cars per day. National standards for neighborhood greenways. The city will plan and fund. Okay, so that's kind of where we were at with the goals for this process. Objectives and outcomes. The city will plan and fund the development of safer space separation of motorized vehicles and people biking, walking, and rolling. Improvements to path alongside Boulevard that will ensure full-time availability of a pedestrian route, and then safe bicycling route along the Boulevard and connecting elements of the park system. So, here is where I put a lot of the information that was collected on how to meet the above objectives and what would make you feel like the community was represented and heard in this process. And so this is going to be very helpful when it comes to drafting the proposal for the finalized outreach plan. All right, Ty just hopped on. So welcome, Ty. We had a presentation regarding the data that has been circulating around on the research that's already been done about how people feel about Lake Washington Boulevard. So that will definitely be accessible to you in the recording of today's meeting. And now we're taking the time to narrow down the questions that people submitted in the outreach form and add to it, but essentially based off of the themes that we were seeing from the outreach document that people submitted, there were kind of three main buckets of what people were most interested in when it came to what we're trying to learn from the community. And those three buckets, if somebody could repost those in the chat, but essentially, okay, let's see, those three buckets again were park experience and improvements as the first one, bike, pedestrian, and people safety as the second one, and then access and circulation network as the third one. And so the questions, the themed survey questions that we're looking at right now are bike, pedestrian, and safety. So I'm gonna come down to those questions. And some of the potential questions, now this one had a lot. So again, we're gonna have to narrow down to what we feel like is most important when asking about pedestrian and bicycle and people safety. So the first one that we have is, how can the city better serve people with disabilities on Lake Washington Boulevard? For the long term, how can motorized vehicles, bicycles, wheelchairs, non-motorized wheels, and pedestrians safely share Lake Washington Boulevard? What are some ways you think we could mitigate the impacts of increased car traffic on Lake Washington Boulevard? Share your ideas for how the city can increase safety for pedestrians and people who ride bikes. How can the city better serve people? Okay, oops, sorry, that was a copy and paste. And general questions around what can be improved along Lake Washington Boulevard. Why is car travel along Lake Washington Boulevard important to you? Why is bike travel along Lake Washington Boulevard important to you? And then if there were other better commuting routes in South Seattle, would you use those for your car and bike commuting? Why would you choose Lake Washington Boulevard over a Stay Healthy Streets route, such as Rainier Avenue South, MLK, or Seward/Wilson? And then during the times the roadway is open to cars, do you consider riding a bike there? Do you feel safer as a pedestrian, runner, or riding or rolling when the roadway is closed to motor vehicles? Do you prefer your experience in the park? Do you prefer your experience in the park is enhanced when the roadway is closed to motor vehicles? How does Lake Washington Boulevard work for you? What can be improved along Lake Washington? Okay, have a couple of repeats. Okay. And then what new facilities could improve your experience on Lake Washington Boulevard? So definitely a lot of questions here that are getting to, how it is that everyone shares the road and what would be needed on that. But these are the questions that seemed, the survey questions that seem to really get the most at pedestrian, bicycle, and safety for everyone on the road. So I'm going to give folks, let's give folks a few moments to look through this. And I can also put these responses in the chat just in case that's easier for some folks. And what would we recommend as like what we feel like deserves the most attention to asking people in this first phase? And if it's helpful to think about it, that we don't have to select the specific question, but what type of questions around this bucket area of pedestrian bicycle safety and safety for everyone really resonates with folks. All right, so Jennifer said that she likes the ones that ask for feedback about what works for them. Okay, I'm gonna write that in the notes section. All right, Jennifer, you have your hand raised.
Other than typing it in the chat. I'm not sure how you would do this, but it seems like we want to know, even if it's just a cursory, like which way do you want to respond? Like from what perspective do you want to respond to this question? Because like I can see that there's lots of people who drive and bicycle, and maybe they want to answer as a bicyclist, even though they're also a driver. So like a part A to this question would be what are you answering as a bicyclist, a person with concerns about accessibility, particular need, and then ask them what works for them, in whatever way that does, so that we could be like, oh, okay, if somebody's really wanting to bicycle, then this is what works for them. Or if somebody really wants to drive, that's their primary reason for answering the survey, this is what works for them. And maybe it's just how we word it, but it would be helpful, I think, knowing kind of the breadth of people that we're reaching. Like we would know at the end if we reach a pretty even number of people that are looking at this issue from different perspectives. And so then are we considering the things that kind of percolate up as really popular? Are we sure it's not because we just mostly talk to drivers or we mostly talk to pedestrians? I guess, yeah.
Perfect. All right. Okay, Clara says, I actually disagree with that. Most people travel around using multiple different ways. I sometimes use Lake Washington Boulevard, walking, biking, or driving, and I take the 52. I wouldn't want to answer the survey with just one of those perspectives. So there's also the option to, perhaps multiple.
I can see what you mean, Tara. And I guess when I'm looking at those questions, I'm feeling like it'd be hard to answer. Like you'd always want to say yes, but or well, it depends, right? Like it seems like and maybe it's just how the wet questions are worded, but we'd want to make sure we were getting a sense of that, like what modes people use, if that makes sense.
Okay, so I believe I saw Jennifer, Joey, and then Clara. Okay, maybe just so we can start with you, Joey. I believe I saw Jennifer.
Sure, yeah, and just kind of piggyback on that concept, I don't think you want to paint, people with disabilities all the same. They have different challenges and different needs and different things that will be helpful in overcoming those barriers. Additionally, when you paint someone as a person who's a bicyclist, there are hundreds of bicyclists who come to Seward Park every Thursday evening because they're practicing for racing. They're different than the children who bicycle with their parents on bicycle Saturdays and bicycle commuters, and other types of recreational bikers. So I don't know that we can really paint groups that broadly.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Joey. And the ways that people use Lake Washington Boulevard in particular are really, really variable depending on that. Like just when this last opening, when Obliteride went through, I was talking to a lot of people who were down there with kids or, were kind of casually biking around who were like really upset and scared by all the people going through really fast because the race route went along Lake Washington Boulevard during the open streets period where it was meant to be open for kids to be biking casually on their tricycles and scooter bikes and stuff. And it was like a very different vibe, even though it was all people on bikes. I was gonna just suggest that one way to get around that might just to be have a couple of opening questions like, how do you currently use Lake Washington Boulevard? How do you want to use Lake Washington Boulevard if X, Y, and Z, and just have a whole bunch of checkboxes and people can check as many or as few as they want. Like how would you use Lake Washington Boulevard if it were like this? Or, just a quick series of questions up at the top that would get at some of those questions they're asking.
All right, thank you. How about Anna? I believe I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, this is Anna. I guess I'm struggling a bit with like what the purpose of this survey is, because I feel like it's one thing to sort of have it be used to gather stories from people about, how they use or want to use this space. And I think that can work. I feel like it's really different to try to have it be something that's quantifiable. And are we saying that it needs to be demographically representative of the city? Or is it, based on some other sort of weighted priorities? And then, if it is like a quantifiable survey, what if a majority of folks say, okay, I don't care about people with disabilities, like, we don't need, like, that's not sort of how the ADA works. Like, that's why we have legal protections for disabled folks and for other minorities, right? Like, you can't just be like, okay, we're going to let the majority say, all right, we don't, your needs aren't going to count in this consideration at all because you're not the majority of people using this space. And so I guess I really just sort of, I think trying to have a bunch of quantifiable questions, unless there's a decision about how that's going to be used and what it really is sort of big questions in my mind. I think it's great to understand qualitatively how people want to use this space, but then to put weight behind something, I think we need to be really intentional about, like what the outcomes are coming out of this. And is that going to guide then what the city recommends? And if so, how is that happening?
Anna, I think I can partially address your question. Earlier in the document, when this collective came together to develop the goals for this process and the objectives and outcomes, it's further up, so I'll just put them in the chat. Thanks for scrolling. So that's for the goals for the overall process. That's seen there where it's like maintain or improve the park experience or reduce the real or perceived barriers to the park. there's quite a few listed on there, so I actually don't have time to read them all. But as far as like your question for like this specific survey, I would say it sounds like it's one of your objectives, which is to understand the real or perceived barriers to accessing the park along Lake Washington Boulevard. And then also, I think further down in this document, it says reach out to people who want to access Lake Washington Boulevard, not just those who currently use it. So hopefully that's kind of guiding what you're looking for, but at the same time, I hear what you're saying, which is like, if we're creating a survey, it needs to have like a very specific purpose. And to gather on an earlier point, like if this task force decides like there needs to be a much more robust 5-step, 10-step approach to outreach and engagement, that could be also part of this committee's recommendations that we would seek additional funding from council or SDOT from.
Perfect. So any other kind of like, when you think of the vision of the type of questions or the direction that we're trying to go and the type of questions we want to ask to understand what the needs and landscape are for safety for pedestrians, bicyclists, and everyone on the road, or on Lake Washington Boulevard, any of these like really stand out to people? Or Jennifer, I see your hand is up.
I put 3 questions over in the chat, kind of pulling from these that I thought might get at it. And one is, does Lake Washington Boulevard work for you? How? And I think that would be good because it would get to all of the users regardless of how they use it. The second one I thought was really good was, why would you choose Lake Washington Boulevard over a Stay Healthy Streets route, Rainier Avenue, yada yada. Because I like that would get at what is it about Lake Washington Boulevard is attracting people and making them want to use it regardless of what mode or how they're using it. And then the last one is, what new facilities, and this was my question, I wasn't sure if facilities was the right word, but like what sort of things could be added to improve the pedestrian and bicycle experience in Lake Washington Boulevard? And so that would be like an actual like get feedback question about actual items that might be considered. So I just throw those 3 questions out there as possible.
Perfect. And one of those was also second by Ty as well. So that's super helpful around the Stay Healthy Streets. Okay, great. And I moved those over to the recommendation column. And then for the long term, okay. There we go. And I think that also gets to some of the comments that we've heard from you, Joey, around the city really needs to think big picture and big vision around around Lake Washington Boulevard. Okay, let's go with Joey and then Patricia, and then we're going to move on to the next bucket.
Yeah, I was thinking that one of the things that we want to do is not just think about what do we want to happen here and now for Lake Washington Boulevard, but I think also by stating what the priorities are, I think it opens a door to have the sidewalks and other things where people are saying the routes are turning up the pathways and they're no longer accessible. That opens up the door to talk about how much more money is needed. Regardless of what they do in terms of closures on Lake Washington Boulevard, these are housekeeping needs that are there, and having this as part of the survey and elevating it up, I think is really important.
All right, I'm gonna put that under the recommendations, and I'm sure there's a way to turn that into like a checkbox thing as well. Okay. Let's see, Patricia, we will end this bucket with you.
Oh, thank you. One of the questions, honestly, I don't know where this falls in the 3 umbrellas, but one of the questions that I had thought we might ask is, how how does Lake Washington Boulevard being closed versus open or open impact you both positively and negatively? In other words, I don't mean to say how do closures impact you, because it's also how does it impact you to have it open and to have it closed, and whether that, and there may be positive or negative impacts on people. But that may not fit with what we're talking about now. But I think what I hear from community members so far is that there is a great impact. So I think it would be good to acknowledge that.
Perfect. Okay. So let's hop over to our last bucket, which is access and circulation. So thinking about how all type of people access Lake Washington Boulevard, and how Lake Washington Boulevard is connected to a larger ecosystem of parks and roads and modes of transportation and getting around. So some of the goals for the process that we kind of felt like fell under this bucket was our locally impacted communities with particular attention. Underserved, under-resourced communities will have robustly publicized access to submitting comments, concerns, questions on the shared use of Lake Washington Boulevard. Okay. That one is a little bit worded interesting.
That's fine.
Oh, it's yours. Okay.
Sorry, I know it's, yeah, I've never composed a survey, so.
No, that's fine. I think, again, a note for SDOT staff and consultants is that, yeah, that was something that we thought would come up. So no need to be an expert on how to write questions. But yeah, your thoughts and ideas can be cleaned up and changed into like what you're trying to communicate. Okay, so the task force will consider all relevant data available to inform its report/vision for Lake Washington Boulevard, including all available public input from the most impacted communities along Lake Washington Boulevard and from commuting workers, including to the south and more underserved areas such as Skyway and other unincorporated King County neighborhoods. Maintain at least partial access for vehicles. Ensure any changes made do not contribute to or introduce barriers to access for the whole community. Maintain vehicle access to local parking lots and destinations. Reduce car collisions by 90%. Reduce vehicle speed to 15 miles per hour. Increase public transit access to the park. Make better transportation connections to other nearby routes, parks, and community destinations. For objectives and outcomes, we heard frequent and reliable transit access, safe and accessible routes to get to the link from both north and south, including installing missing curb ramps and building an accessible sidewalk that connects to Coleman Park up the hill, and sidewalk barriers, no parking signs along Lakeside Drive that make the sidewalk inaccessible. A wide and smooth route separated from traffic for people to walk, roll, and bike along the lake, with plenty of space for people moving at different speeds to pass without conflicts. Okay, so if we scroll down to what are some of the questions you would want to ask community members? What came out from the outreach documents that were submitted were that for the short term, what would you prefer regarding the Lake Washington Boulevard closures to motorized vehicles? Never, day long, weekend, holiday weekends, Friday to Monday, etc. How do closures impact you and your family negatively or positively, considering recreational and family needs? So that kind of goes back to what Patricia brought up on the last bucket. How can the city provide better public transportation access to parks along Lake Washington Boulevard? How would you like to use Lake Washington Boulevard? What are the barriers/challenges currently to using Lake Washington Boulevard as you would like to use this community space? So I think some repetition from other things that we've heard in the other buckets. But nonetheless, when we think about just kind of this idea of access and circulation network, this might be, what kind of ties together the different outreach questions that we're hearing. So I'm gonna put these in the chat for reference. And if there's anything missing that could guide the vision of the type of questions we want to ask for this, please, we can add to it, or if there are things on this question list that really stand out that we like, we can move from there as well. Okay, so Jennifer said, I like, how would you like to use question? Yeah, so that's a common theme that we're definitely seeing from the other buckets that could help us actually maybe cut down on our question list. So there's lots of overlap there. Let's see, I see Joey's hand and then Patricia's.
Oops. How about this? Would you be willing to support increased funding from the Seattle Parks District to make changes on Lake Washington Boulevard?
Okay. Okay, Patricia, did I see your hand up? Okay. Ty, I know you often have a really great perspective on making sure that we are also including the perspective of drivers who commute. And so I'm curious, particularly under this bucket, if there are particular questions that, you feel really reflect a way for us to get better information from drivers, or if there's other things that we could be missing when it comes to capturing the perspective of those folks who use motor vehicles on the boulevard.
Thanks for asking, Jackie. Hi, everyone. I think that some of these questions are overlapping, but in the same way that there are different types of cyclists who use Lake Washington, whether or not they're the professional cyclists or the leisure or family, there are lots of different types of people who use motor vehicles. So it could be for commuting, it could be for elderly family who don't have the ability to get out of the car and enjoy. So it could be for disabled family members for which motorized vehicles are the only way they can access Lake Washington. It could be for people who are driving for leisure because that's the only moment of mental health relief they get is driving along the lake. So like you said, you all have a way of wording the questions, but getting at the different ways that, or the different reasons people use a motor vehicle on Lake Washington Boulevard. Sorry, that was a long answer. I'm done, thank you.
No, that's super helpful. That could, I'm sure, easily be worded into a question on why you commute using a car on Lake Washington Boulevard. So that's great. Oops, okay. Let me see. Other thoughts that come to folks' mind.
Hoy vamos a preparar.
Okay, that's good. put that in the notes section as well. Okay. Clara, I see your hand went up.
Yeah, I know that we didn't really make a decision earlier on kind of the balance between the open-ended priorities questions and the more like specific solutions-based questions. But I just wanted to put this out there while we're talking about regional circulation and commuting, is a lot of these are kind of like asking people to weigh or prioritize like bike and pedestrian access versus car access. And I know that one of the solutions that was proposed over the last couple of years was like turning one of the lanes on Lake Washington Boulevard into a multi-use pathway and then having the other lane be one direction for car vehicles. And given that a lot of these questions seem to be sort of asking people to pick sides, I just wanted to put it out there as like, if we do include questions that are more solutions focused, making sure that we're allowing that as an option. That like, there are solutions that have both access for both. And if we were to go with that type of solution, there would be other follow-up questions that we would need to ask people. If that makes sense.
Perfect. I just added that as a note as well. Okay. Anything else before, I see we're at 5:54, but before we close out for next steps? Perfect, Ty.
I think building on what Clara said, if there are proposed solutions, that's great, but also inviting the community if they have ideas of what potential solutions could be. I'm done.
Great. Patricia, was your hand, is this a new?
Yes, sorry, keep forgetting to lower the hand, but I put this out in an email, but I think we should keep in mind that the city has planned and funded many projects in which there is, and I listed 4 of them, but there probably are more, in which they have figured out a way to allow safe access for motorized vehicles, pedestrians, and cyclists, pedestrians, and people rolling. And in pretty much every sector of the city except Southeast. So along with it, instead of it being a either or a this versus that, I would encourage us to think big and think that we sort of in the Southeast should also think about the fact that we deserve the kind of attention that has been given to those other projects that have been carried out in various places of the city. So I think we shouldn't limit ourselves to an either or, have to give something up situation. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. So I know we have a small group today, but I feel like one of the things that we wanted to propose, and I feel like I'm also hearing it from y'all's responses, is that at this point, we've done a lot of work to create what our goals and visions are for this project, what potential outcomes and solutions could look like for Lake Washington Boulevard. understanding equity and what markers of equity look like for us, and now taking a deep dive into the type of questions, content, and data that we are hoping to be able to collect from community. And all of this work has, of course, gone through a collective process. We have learned a lot from each other. I know myself, I've definitely learned a lot from you all. And because of, some of the constraints that we've talked about, particularly Ching, like helping to bring up, that it's not anybody's fault, the timeline that we're on, but being realistic about capacity and the timeline that we want to make sure that we're moving at the pace of trust, but also getting this process done as well. And so I want to kind of hear from you all how you feel that now that we've gone through some of these deep discussions and brainstorming and strategy processes, do folks feel comfortable that based off of the information that we have put together as a team, as a task force, the information that you all put together, how do we feel about SDOT staff and consultants kind of cleaning this up and proposing what the outreach process is going to look like? And be able to kind of solidify that probably over email with you all, so that we can start moving on those plans to have whatever is decided out in by mid-end September and run it through October with potential, or not potential, but definitely some type of public outreach event in October, whether that be virtual, in person, or hybrid. Do folks feel comfortable with that? Jennifer, your hand is up.
I feel like this was a great discussion, but I'm wondering if there's a way to build into that an opportunity for the rest of the people on the task force that couldn't be here to weigh in, just because it is August and so a lot of people are missing, and still keep the process going. So maybe not start at step one with that we started today, but just make sure that we get their input before we get any further, just so we don't miss a great opportunity to add another thought or another question to the list. I would just throw that out there. But I hear what you're saying, and I'm feeling good about how the discussion went today.
Perfect. Ching, I see that you put your hand up.
Thank you. I think something that we can float the idea of is to have another meeting. I understand that there were some folks that were concerned last time around in terms of like how many times we were meeting, and that, folks, have their full-time job. And so this is in addition to that, and we want to be mindful and respectful of everyone's time. But I just feel like this is such important work. And we do have a timeline to meet, that we can make an optional meeting happen in the next 2 weeks or so, to kind of solidify our survey questions and get us ready to go out with a survey. If that's something that folks are interested in, we certainly can pull one together. But I just wanted to be flexible and open to options. And it doesn't have to be another 2-hour meeting. It could be a 1-hour meeting. It can be a shortened meeting. But providing an opportunity for folks especially folks who have missed today's meeting, to chime in and have a opportunity to catch up.
Patricia, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I was just thinking that they still do have an opportunity to submit their ideas. We only have 4 questionnaires back, so folks didn't necessarily have to be here to present their ideas, because I think that was the point of the questionnaire. I'm also going to say, I think that for some of our team members, the question of public outreach is less important to them than their own organizational or individual goals for what they would like to see on happened with Lake Washington Boulevard. And in that case, maybe this particular piece wasn't of as much interest to them. But at any rate, they still have the opportunity to give that input.
All right, Joey, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, and so kind of going along with what Patricia was saying, one of my big concerns is, we stand here as the people who are trying to define what the audience is going to be for this survey. And are those things going to be meeting the standards of the city of Seattle in terms of equity, diversity, inclusion? Neighborhoods, will they be left out? There's so many factors in here. I'd really like to know, from the SDOT, what is the requirements that we reach out? Because people have done surveys and they said they reached everybody in the neighborhood, and everybody in the neighborhood said, some people in the neighborhood said they didn't receive anything. So is a digital campaign going to work? I got a flyer in the mail today that said they're going to be doing trafficking, photograph tracking near the ticketing near the school that I drive past. So is that going to be the methodology? And so without understanding who the audience is, you can really, determine what's the outcome, the validity of the outcome. If you're not really making sure the people who need to get this in their hands, and that's the other question, how do we decide who needs to get this in their hands? That's a big thing for me. And I think that needs to be addressed earlier than later. And part of that is who gets to say so. The people on this group, or SDOT, or the city attorney.
That's a great point, Joey. I can speak a little bit to that. I can attempt to. I think what makes this effort a little trickier is that typically with construction projects or projects that we have where we build bike lanes or build sidewalks or whatnot, those are a lot more simple because you just reach out to adjacent neighbors on adjacent streets, right? Those that are impacted by construction. With Lake Washington Boulevard, it can be literally anyone, right? It could be anyone from the north end, from the south end, anyone who access this park, access this part of South Seattle. And it's not just pertaining to people who live on Lake Washington Boulevard, right? It could be people who commute through. And so I think we have that a lengthy list of stakeholder groups that we definitely need to reach out to. I think there can be a social media push to try to reach folks beyond those geographic boundaries. A mailer is certainly in order for us to kind of promote an online survey. Like I said, an intercept survey is probably one of the best way to try to reach people that come to the park. It may be harder to reach folks that are commuting through the park or through on Lake Washington Boulevard, especially people who drive through. I just don't see a lot of opportunity in stopping people driving to fill out a survey. But those are some of the options that we have on the table. And we're open to other creative ways to reach folks that we don't typically aren't able to engage in these processes. But I think it's a joint effort between this task force and SDOT.
And part of that are the people on this panel willing to accept those media outlets that we put out there. Some people don't feel that the people who are commuting from Renton to parts north of Seattle have a decision in this. Some people think that this should be kept a little bit closer to home. And I don't know how we make a decision that's going to be fully accepted by everyone. But anyway, that's just something I wanted to raise. The audience is going to be critically important in all this thing.
Yeah, that's a great point, Joey, and a big part of why yes, Ty, the survey can be translated into different languages. Joey, that's a great point. And one of the reasons why we were trying to focus a lot in the beginning on strategy to be able to have these guiding things. But yeah, at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to reach everybody. And so what do our parameters and bottom lines look like? And I believe one of the things that we wanted to propose to folks is that when thinking about outreach efforts and resources, that how do we prioritize those who have the highest barriers to participating in processes such as these? Or sorry, so who is the farthest? My bad, I have the others. Okay, so thinking about who has, like, you know, the least access or most barriers to be able to access being a part of this process. So how do we prioritize those folks in our outreach? So when we think about access, like thinking about language access, people who have been historically excluded from processes such as these, other type of factors such as that, and kind of rooting it in those principles of RSJI that the city's race and social justice initiative that we had went in depth about in the beginning to kind of help guide us through that. Okay. All right, I will add that to the list. I remember you mentioning them, but it looks like maybe taking notes quick, they didn't get on there. Okay. Oh, actually it was EACS, East African Community Services. Okay. Sorry, I abbreviated them. Okay. Perfect. So let's see. For next steps, I'm feeling like we should keep it open for people to respond to who have not submitted answers to the outreach form. I'm going to assume that those of you who are here today, but who didn't submit an outreach form, that today's participation kind of like check the box and now you can be excused from having to fill out the Google Doc. Unless you particularly want to, you're more than okay to do that, but you got to do your homework in class today. So that's, you know, always a bonus. And then we will open it up for folks to join one of our, I feel like we have standing meetings as SDOT staff and consultants, where we can basically put together, based off of the feedback from the strategy discussions that we've had and this outreach document, a proposed plan to get this work done between the months of September and October. All right. Okay, so we will be getting out to you soon to kind of finalize what that timeline looks like around the different meetings. But if folks are feeling okay with that, we are very, very close to being able to implement this process. So kudos to you all. This has been a lot of work and a lot of great discussions, but we've truly been able to put in a lot of groundwork to get us to this place. And that's not easy. All right. So I believe our next scheduled meeting is, Belen, it's the third Monday of the month, correct? Or fourth?
The last Monday of the month.
Oh, the last Monday of the month. Okay, so our next scheduled meeting would be September 26th, but we will be getting back to folks soon on what the optional meeting is to join the meeting to kind of put together the whole proposal and plan. Okay, wonderful. All right, y'all. Well, I hope you enjoy the rest of your Monday evening. Thank you for staying with us, as I know we went over time.
Thank you.
Thank you all. And perhaps
Yeah.
as staff.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Let me just have a good evening.